The chapel smelled of lilies and old wood, yet all I could feel was fire burning in my chest. Daniel's casket stood only feet away, but every whisper circled around her. The stranger in pearls, seated in the front row, next to my mother-in-law. Sylvia leaned in proudly, introducing her like blood, and when the girl smiled, she whispered to the guests, "I was supposed to be his wife. My name is Rachel Miller. I was married to Daniel for 8 years. 8 years of shared mortgage payments, late-night dinners, quiet arguments, and promises that, in the end, turned out to be nothing more than smoke. 8 years of being told to try harder, to smile wider, to be less difficult and more grateful. And now, here I was, watching another woman take my seat in my own husband's story. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely happens in one sudden blow. It's not a gunshot or an explosion. It's slow. It's the creak of a floorboard in the middle of the night, the scent of perfume on a shirt that isn't yours, the way a voice lowers when the phone rings. You think you can ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist, until the weight of it crushes you. I had learned that lesson long before the funeral. Sylvia made sure of it. She lived 2 streets away, but acted like she lived in my kitchen. Years earlier, Daniel had given her a spare key, just in case. He never took it back. She used it freely, striding in without knocking, as if the house I paid half the mortgage for belonged to her. One Tuesday morning, she let herself in while I was balancing spreadsheets on my laptop. "Rachel," she said, pouring coffee like she owned the place. "A woman your age should be preparing for motherhood, not QuickBooks reports." That was Sylvia, in a single sentence. Judgment disguised as advice. She wore criticism like perfume, thick and impossible to ignore. She believed in bloodlines, appearances, and control. To her, I was a placeholder, someone to warm Daniel's bed until a more suitable option arrived. And judging by the woman in pearls, that option had already arrived long before the casket. I wanted to scream at the chapel full of mourners, to point and shout that this was madness, that Sylvia had introduced a mistress, possibly even a con artist, as though she were royalty. But my throat burned, and my knees trembled. People stared at me, waiting to see how I would react, whether I would collapse or claw back my dignity. Grief is strange. It makes time bend and stretch. One second you're a wife, clinging to the faint hope of reconciliation. The next, you're a widow, erased from your own life. Yet even in that fog, I knew one thing. Sylvia wasn't finished with me. This wasn't just a funeral. It was a test, a performance staged for the community. And I was expected to play the grieving wife, while another woman rehearsed as the replacement. I gripped the edge of the pew so hard my knuckles went white. I could hear Harper, the stranger, introducing herself to people I'd known for years, smiling, charming, pretending. And then, as if to drive the knife deeper, she leaned toward a guest beside her, lowered her voice just enough, and whispered words that cracked the air, open like glass. "I was supposed to be his wife." The room seemed to tilt. My vision blurred. In that single sentence, she wasn't just claiming Daniel. She was erasing me. If you've ever felt betrayed by the ones meant to protect you, you'll want to hear this. Because betrayal doesn't start at funerals or whispered lies. It starts with tiny cracks in the walls you thought were solid. And if you're not careful, those cracks become chasms. For me, it began with numbers. I live in numbers. They're my job, my comfort. Spreadsheets don't lie, but people do. One Friday evening, Daniel left his wallet on the counter, something he rarely did. A folded receipt slipped out. Cartier, a bracelet worth more than my monthly paycheck. I hadn't received jewelry in years. Not for my birthday, not for Christmas, not even for our anniversary. The next day, I checked the online credit statement. My name wasn't on the card, but the charges screamed at me. Spa World Platinum, Louis Vuitton, a $900 silk robe. None of them were mine. At first, I told myself he was just being generous with clients. Daniel worked in logistics, often entertaining business partners. Maybe the bracelet was for a deal, the robe a gift for some executive's wife. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't just the money. It was the smell. Jasmine, a perfume I didn't own. It clung to Daniel's dress shirts like guilt. I hadn't worn perfume in months. I barely had time to put on mascara most mornings. Yet suddenly, the scent of another woman followed him home like a shadow. I told myself I needed proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. So I started collecting screenshots of bank statements, photos of receipts I taped together from the trash, mileage on his car. I became a detective in my own marriage. The breaking point came on our anniversary. 8 years. I cooked dinner, lit candles, even pulled out the bottle of wine we'd been saving. Daniel never showed. At midnight, I sat alone at the table, the food cold, the candles burned to stubs. When he finally came home, he mumbled about a client dinner and went straight upstairs. 2 days later, I found it, the hotel bill, dated the night of our anniversary. The Plaza, downtown. 1 suite, 1 night, 2 meals charged to the room. My chest went tight. My hands shook so hard, the paper crumpled. I wanted to storm upstairs, throw it in his face, demand answers. But instead, I slipped it into a folder I kept hidden behind the cleaning supplies. My folder of evidence, because some part of me still hoped I was wrong, that there was an explanation, however twisted. Then came the afternoon that hope died. I left work early, files in hand, ready to surprise Daniel at his office. I parked across the street, my heart pounding with the thrill of spontaneity, the naive idea of saving our marriage. I looked up just as the door opened. Daniel walked out. He wasn't alone. Beside him was a tall, blonde woman in a fitted dress. Her hand brushed his arm, and he leaned in, smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at me in months. He glanced around, as if checking for witnesses. Then he pulled her close, and there, under the harsh daylight of downtown traffic, I saw my husband wrap his arms around Harper Vance. The lie came wrapped in a business trip. Daniel kissed my cheek one Friday morning and muttered something about Cleveland, a warehouse audit, long hours ahead. I nodded, half listening, because what choice did I have anymore? But later that night, when I noticed his personal phone still sitting on the dresser, my chest tightened. Daniel never left without it. He guarded that device like it held his pulse. I picked it up, telling myself I would just put it away. But at 2:30 in the morning, it started to vibrate. The sound cut through the silence like a siren. I froze, staring at the screen. An unfamiliar number. My fingers shook as I swiped. "Hello?" A woman's voice burst through, high and panicked. "Are you Daniel's wife?" "Yes. Who is this?" He collapsed. "Oh God. We're at the Plaza downtown. They're taking him to St. Luke's Hospital. It's his heart. Please hurry." The line went dead. For a second, I couldn't move. My breath came shallow, my mind blank. Then instinct took over. Jeans over pajamas, keys in hand, I drove through the sleeping city with the speedometer pushing red. The streets blurred, the lights stretched like ribbons. My heart pounding louder than the tires on the asphalt. The hospital smelled like bleach and cold metal. At the desk, I stammered. "My husband, Daniel Blake. They just brought him in." The nurse didn't flinch. "Cardiac wing, room 412. They stabilized him." "Prepare yourself." "Prepare myself? For what?" I stumbled down the hallway, each fluorescent light buzzing louder, the floor stretching endless beneath my shoes. Then I stopped. She was already there, tall, blonde, polished like a magazine cover. She clutched a Louis Vuitton bag like it was oxygen. Her mascara streaked, but her posture steady. Her heels clicked against the tile as she turned toward me. Our eyes met. "You must be Rachel," she whispered, my name cracking in her mouth. My skin went cold. "Who are you?" Her hands trembled, but her chin lifted. "I'm Harper. Daniel and we were supposed to get married." The words landed like a slap, the hallway spinning around me. Married. To her. I couldn't even form a sentence. My throat locked, my breath snagged. All I could do was stare at the woman who wore the bracelet I had given Daniel on our 5th anniversary. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers, to shake her until the lies fell out. But before I could speak, footsteps thundered behind me. A perfume clouded the air, heavy, floral, familiar. "Where is he?" Sylvia's voice sliced through the corridor. My mother-in-law marched forward, Mason trailing behind like a shadow. She spotted Harper and, instead of shock, instead of outrage, her face broke into something terrifying. Relief. "Oh, thank God," Sylvia cried, rushing forward with arms wide. "Harper." She wrapped the young woman in an embrace I had never received, not once in 8 years of marriage. And there, in the sterile hallway of St. Luke's Hospital, my mother-in-law held my husband's mistress like a long-lost daughter. When people picture grief, they imagine tears and hugs, casseroles left on the porch, friends whispering, "Stay strong." My grief came dressed in silk and diamonds, carried on the arm of a woman I had never invited into my life. My grief had a name, Harper, and it was being blessed by my mother-in-law. Sylvia pulled back from the embrace, her hands gripping Harper's shoulders as if presenting a trophy. "You're safe now," she said, her voice almost trembling with joy. Joy, in a hospital hallway where her only son lay unconscious. I felt invisible, like wallpaper in my own story. "Sylvia," I managed, my voice scraping. "What is this? Who is she?" Sylvia turned to me, her expression sharp as glass. "This is Harper Vance, the woman Daniel should have been with all along." I staggered. My hand found the wall to steady myself. "Should have been with? I'm his wife." Her lips curled in a cold smile. "You had 8 years, Rachel. 8 years, and nothing to show for it. No child, no legacy. Daniel deserves more than paperwork and disappointment." I opened my mouth, but no words came. It was Mason who stepped forward, his face lined with weariness. He didn't defend me. He didn't scold Sylvia. He just sighed, as though my existence had always been a burden he was finally free of. Harper stood frozen, mascara streaking down her cheeks. For a moment, I almost thought she felt guilty, but then her hand drifted protectively over her flat stomach, and Sylvia's eyes followed like a hawk. "You knew," I whispered, the realization slamming into me. "You knew about her." Sylvia didn't even flinch. "Of course I knew. Do you think Daniel could carry a secret like this without help? I encouraged it." Her eyes gleamed. "At least now we won't lose everything our family built. Harper carries our future." My stomach lurched. She said it so easily, as though it was a business deal, a calculated merger. In her mind, my husband's betrayal wasn't tragedy. It was salvation. "You're insane," I choked. "This is cruel." "Cruel?" Sylvia stepped closer, her perfume choking the air between us. "Cruel is letting the Blake family line end, because you couldn't do your part. Cruel is denying Mason and me the grandchild we deserve. You think marriage is about love? It's about legacy, Rachel. And Harper understands that better than you ever did." Her words sliced deeper than any knife. All those years of infertility, of tests and tears, of holding Daniel's hand through disappointment after disappointment, they had never mattered to her. To Sylvia, I was only as valuable as the womb I didn't have. I wanted to scream. I wanted to claw at the walls until the paint peeled, but the steady beep of Daniel's heart monitor tethered me to silence. My husband was alive, barely, and his mother was already planning a future without me. Mason's voice rumbled low, almost apologetic. It's for the best. Rachel, don't fight it. I turned toward him, searching for even a flicker of compassion. There was none, just resignation. Then I heard Sylvia again, softer this time, her voice dropping into something almost reverent. She leaned toward Mason, thinking I couldn't hear. At least our bloodline is safe now. The words echoed down the sterile hallway, colder than any grave. Funerals are supposed to be about closure, about saying goodbye with dignity. Mine was about survival. By the time the service began, Daniel was no longer a man I had loved. He was a stage, and Sylvia was directing every moment of the play. The chapel was packed. Friends, colleagues, distant relatives all craned their necks to see the Blake family seated up front. And there she was, Harper Vance, draped in black silk, pearls at her throat, her blonde hair arranged in soft waves. She looked less like a mourner and more like a senator's widow. Sylvia ushered her into the front row, directly beside me, as if the ink on my marriage license had already evaporated. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering as Sylvia introduced Harper proudly to anyone within earshot. "This is Harper," she whispered, with a smile that cut like a blade. "She's family now. She's carrying Daniel's future." I wanted to shout, to stand on the pew and scream the truth, but instead, I forced myself to the pulpit. The pastor nodded, and it was my turn to speak. My throat burned, my hands trembled, but I read the eulogy I had written alone at 3 a.m. I talked about Daniel's kindness, his laughter, his dreams. Lies, maybe, but the kind we tell to keep the air from collapsing. The words barely left my mouth when I heard it. A laugh, small at first, then sharper. I turned my head. Harper. She was smiling, not the brittle smile of grief, but the smug smile of victory. Her eyes glittered like glass, catching sunlight, and she leaned toward the woman next to her. "She deserved it," Harper said, her voice carrying farther than she realized. 8 years and nothing. No kids, no spark. She was just a placeholder. A murmur swept through the room. People shifted in their seats, whispers rising like smoke. My chest tightened, fury and humiliation tangling, until I thought I might collapse. But Harper wasn't done. She tossed her hair back and added, loud enough for the back row to hear. She couldn't even keep his attention. Maybe if she wasn't such a barren little failure, none of this would have happened. The words shattered me. The years of doctor visits, the nights of crying in silence, the pain of every negative test. They all came flooding back, exposed like an open wound in front of everyone I knew. I opened my mouth, but before I could form a defense, Sylvia's voice cut through. "You had 8 years, Rachel," she declared, her tone cold, final. "And nothing. Maybe Daniel just needed a real woman." Gasps erupted. Someone dropped a glass in the back. The room buzzed. An angry hornet's nest of judgment and disbelief. My knees buckled. I gripped the pulpit with white knuckles, staring at the faces around me. Some pitying, some horrified, all watching to see if I would break. My vision blurred, the world shrinking to a tunnel of shame. And then, through the haze, another voice cut through the noise. "I think it's time." Someone told the truth about Harper Vance. The room snapped to silence. Heads turned toward the back of the chapel. There, framed in the doorway, stood my brother, Dylan. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked on Harper, and he wasn't smiling. The air inside the chapel went still, like even the walls were holding their breath. My brother Dylan stood framed in the doorway, broad-shouldered in his dark suit, eyes hard as flint. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the soft hum of the air vents and the pounding in my ears. He walked down the aisle with slow, measured steps, each one echoing against the floorboards. People shifted in their seats, leaning away as though they could feel the weight he carried. He stopped only a few feet from Harper, his hands clasped in front of him, posture steady and unyielding. "I knew you looked familiar," Dylan said, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. He didn't raise it, yet somehow it carried to every corner of the room. "It took me a minute, but I made a call this morning." That's when it clicked. Harper stiffened, her polished veneer cracking at the edges. I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, you know," Dylan replied, tilting his head. "See, my buddy in law enforcement owes me a favor. I asked him to run a name. Yours, Harper Vance. And wouldn't you know it, your file's not exactly spotless." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Harper's cheeks flushed, her manicured hands trembling in her lap. Sylvia glanced between them, confusion twisting into unease. Dylan pulled a folded paper from his jacket. He held it up for everyone to see. "Fraud investigation, Colorado, 2 years ago. You opened accounts in other people's names, drained them, disappeared before charges stuck. Ring any bells?" Gasps filled the room. The pastor's face paled. Someone muttered, "My God, that's a lie!" Harper snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. She stood, shoulders squared, eyes darting nervously across the crowd. "I left all that behind. I've changed." Dylan's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving hers. "Changed? Or just upgraded your target? First, it was bank accounts. Now it's families, rich ones, vulnerable ones." Like the Blake Sylvia shot up from her seat, fury blazing. "Stop this at once. How dare you humiliate her on this day?" But Dylan didn't blink. He leaned closer, his voice low, deliberate. "I'm not humiliating her. She did that herself." The silence that followed was heavier than any sermon. Harper's lips parted, searching for words that wouldn't come. She looked small now, stripped of the glossy confidence she'd worn like armor. I watched, my breath caught in my throat. This was my brother, the one person who had never once let me down, standing between me and the fire. For the first time in months, I felt the faint flicker of safety. Dylan straightened, sliding the paper back into his jacket. "There's one more thing," he said, his tone darkening. He turned slowly, his eyes sweeping across the stunned faces in the chapel, before locking back on Harper. "She's not just a fraud. She's a wife." A stunned murmur rippled through the pews. Harper's face drained of color. No, that's not true," she stammered. "I left him. We're separated. It's complicated." Dylan cut her off, his voice rising for the first time. "Complicated? Number? Simple. You're still married. Your real name isn't Harper Vance. It's Harper Jameson, and your husband is very much alive." Gasps turned into an uproar. Sylvia's mouth fell open. Mason staggered back, gripping the pew for support. "And she's still married," Dylan thundered, his voice echoing off the chapel walls. At that exact moment, the back doors swung open with a bang. The sound ricocheted like a gunshot. Heads whipped around, the entire room pivoting toward the entrance. A tall man strode in, dressed in jeans and a worn leather jacket, his presence filling the doorway. His eyes were locked on Harper, his expression hard enough to crack stone. "Harper," he barked. She flinched like she'd been struck. And just like that, the carefully constructed facade she had built began to collapse. The man in the leather jacket marched forward, each step echoing against the chapel floor. He didn't glance, left or right, didn't acknowledge the gasps or whispers. His eyes locked solely on Harper, and the tension that followed him felt like a storm rolling in. "Harper!" he barked again, his voice sharp, commanding. She froze, her mouth opening then snapping shut. Her polished facade, the pearls, the hair, the designer bag, suddenly looked like props in a play she no longer knew how to perform. The man stopped only a few feet from her. Or should I say, Mrs. Jameson. The room erupted. People leaned forward, whispers spreading like wildfire. Sylvia's face drained of color. Mason's hand slipped from the back of the pew, and Harper herself staggered, as though the weight of her own name had knocked her off balance. "Who are you?" Sylvia demanded, her voice trembling between outrage and fear. "I'm Thomas Jameson," he said, pulling a small device from his pocket. "Her husband." He lifted it, pressed play, and the chapel filled with Harper's own voice. "I faked the pregnancy." The recording hissed through the speakers. Harper's voice, unmistakable, smug, and careless. "I just wanted a slice of his money. His family's loaded. Once he's gone, I'll say the baby's his. By the time they figure it out, it'll be too late." The gasp that followed rattled the stained glass windows. A woman in the back dropped her hymnal. Someone else muttered a prayer under their breath. My pulse roared in my ears, and I gripped the pew for balance as the truth reverberated through every corner of the chapel. Harper lunged forward, her hand outstretched. "That's fake!" "He's lying." But Dylan was already moving, calm, steady, deliberate. He produced a thin folder and laid it on the condolence table like evidence in a courtroom. "Divorce papers," he said, his voice low but carrying. "Signed by Thomas. Filed legally. All that's missing is her signature." The crowd surged forward, people craning to see, some even rising to their feet. The energy in the room shifted from disbelief to condemnation, from gossip to fury. Harper looked around wildly, searching for an ally. But not even Sylvia moved to shield her now. "You don't understand," Harper stammered, her face blotched red. "I was protecting Daniel. I was giving him what Rachel couldn't." "Enough," Dylan cut in, his tone like a gavel striking. "You stole from a veteran. You committed fraud across state lines. And you thought you could bury my sister at her husband's funeral. Not today." The crowd roared in agreement, an angry, rising tide of voices. People who had once looked at me with pity now turned on Harper with disgust. Even Mason shook his head, shame clouding his features. But then something shifted. I caught the flicker in Sylvia's eyes. Not shock, not horror, recognition. She wasn't blindsided. She wasn't fooled. She had known. "You knew," I whispered, the realization slamming into me. My voice carried farther than I expected, louder in the stunned silence. "You knew she was lying." Sylvia's lips trembled. Her eyes darted between me, Harper, and Mason. Finally, her shoulders sagged, and she whispered, "I didn't care. All I wanted was a grandchild. All I wanted was the Blake line to continue." The words silenced even the angriest voices. People turned, staring at Sylvia now, the matriarch who had preached about honor and family values. Her mask crumbled, revealing desperation and fear where there should have been strength. Harper backed toward the aisle, her heels clicking in panic. "I don't have to take this," she hissed. "You can't prove." But the proof was already echoing through the chapel in her own voice. Dylan stepped in her path, his frame blocking the exit. "You're done," he said flatly. "You can sign those papers here, in front of witnesses, or you can explain yourself to the authorities. Either way, this ends now." Shaking, Harper grabbed the pen offered to her, her signature scratched across the page, jagged and trembling. The moment she finished, she bolted for the side door. No one followed. No one defended her. The crowd parted like water, letting her flee, her heels clattering like a gavel sealing her fate. The door slammed, and silence pressed down like a heavy shroud. I turned to Sylvia. She had collapsed onto the pew, her hands trembling in her lap. Mason stood behind her, his head bowed, shame carving deep lines into his face. Sylvia's eyes glistened as she stared at the empty aisle where Harper had just fled. For the first time, her voice broke, fragile and thin. "We've lost everything," she whispered. And in that moment, I believed her. Weeks passed after the funeral. But time didn't move in straight lines anymore. It twisted and bent, leaving me stranded between numbness and rage. The world kept spinning. Cars still filled the streets, emails still pinged in my inbox, but I walked through it like a shadow. For the first time in years, I didn't check the mailbox with dread, waiting for bills Daniel had hidden. I didn't listen for his key in the lock, didn't brace myself for the scent of another woman's perfume on his shirt. The silence in my home was heavy, but it was honest. Then one morning, the silence broke in a way I hadn't expected. I couldn't keep my coffee down. I told myself it was stress, the leftover storm of everything I had endured. But when it happened again and again, something inside me stirred. I bought the test at a pharmacy near work. I couldn't bring myself to take it at home, not in the kitchen, where Daniel once dropped lies onto the counter with his receipts. So I locked myself in the office bathroom, my hands trembling as I waited for the result. 2 lines. I sat on the closed toilet, staring, my lungs refusing to fill. 2 lines. After years of tears, of infertility treatments, of being told I was a barren little failure, there it was in my hand. Proof of a heartbeat not yet born, but already mine. The doctor confirmed it days later with calm certainty. Her smile was warm when she said, "Congratulations, Rachel. You're pregnant." I left the office with sunlight in my eyes and a strange weightlessness in my chest. For so long, I had believed betrayal would define me, that Daniel's lies, Sylvia's cruelty, Harper's venom would be the bookends of my life. But now, within me, there was something else, something untouched by their schemes, something pure. I placed a hand on my stomach as I sat in my car, whispering words only I could hear. He never gave me peace or love or safety. But maybe this child, is the one true gift Daniel ever left behind. And for the first time in months, I smiled. This is where people expect revenge to finish the story. To tell you that Harper was prosecuted, that Sylvia lost her influence, that Mason vanished into silence. Maybe those things happened, maybe not. What matters is that I survived. I didn't collapse when the lies piled higher than the truth. I didn't disappear when they tried to erase me. Instead, I'm standing here now with something stronger than revenge, a future. So I'll leave you with this. When betrayal breaks you, do you rebuild with forgiveness, or let revenge define you? I won't pretend it's easy. The anger still stirs some nights, sharp and hot. I still hear Harper's laugh, Sylvia's words, Daniel's silence. But I also hear something else now, the steady rhythm of a new heartbeat, reminding me that life doesn't end with betrayal. The truth always wins. It may take time, it may drag us through fire and humiliation, but it will surface. And when it does, you have a choice, to live in the ashes or to build something stronger. I choose to build. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real revenge. Not in destroying the ones who hurt you, but in refusing to let them decide the rest of your life. Because love, real love, isn't about bloodlines or appearances. It's about courage, about rising after the storm, about holding on to the small miracles that appear when you least expect them. And as I sit here now, my hand resting on the quiet promise beneath my ribs, I know this. My life isn't over. It's only beginning.